Hi, I'm Amy, and welcome to a chronological study of the life of Jesus. Join me as we study the Gospels in order using John MacArthur's book, One Perfect Life. Welcome to lesson 57. In the previous lessons, we were talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and then in the last lesson, Jesus had gone back into the town of Capernaum, and he had healed the centurion's servant. And so in this lesson, lesson 57, Jesus raises a widow's dead son. So it's going to be another healing type miracle. It's going to be a resurrection, actually. And it's in the Gospel of Luke. And we're going to discuss kind of why it's placed there and what's the purpose of this story, where it is, the location, and what it means. So Jesus has been in Capernaum, and now he's going to travel to a town called Nain. N-A-I-N, and we're going to talk about that. So let's read first from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, and then I got 5 points. Hopefully it'll be a quick lesson. Now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak. And he presented him to his mother. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. The first point I have is context. Let's nail down what the context is. So we need to know where was Nain and why was Jesus there, and exactly what's going on here. So it says the day after. The day after being the time that this is coming from Luke chapter 7. So this is a story, this raising of the son is unique to the Gospel of Luke. So Luke is the only one that included this here. And so when you see something like that, it's important to try to figure out why he included this story and none of the others did, and why he put it where he did. So he puts it the day after he's raised, that he's healed the centurion's servant. And then it says, now it happened the day after. It's just the flow in the story. And in some Bibles it'll read soon after that or the day after. So it's in close proximity of time to when he had healed the centurion's servant that was close to death. He healed him and gave him health back. Well, this time he's going down to Nain and he's going to raise this guy back from the dead. So where is Nain then? Nain is a small city, or it was a small little town, about 8 to 10 miles southeast of Nazareth. So it was in essence about 25 or so miles from Capernaum. And in their time, a day's journey was about 20 to 25 miles. So it's very possible that he was in Capernaum, healed the centurion's servant, and then traveled down and made it to Nain. And so it is about a day's journey from Capernaum. And we don't really know why Jesus was there. We don't know if he had been traveling to Nazareth, if he was going down to Jerusalem, or exactly what is going on here. We just know that he was traveling through. Nain was not his destination, per se. It is just somewhere that he ended up finding himself. But what we know to be true is Jesus orchestrated that meeting. He was in Nain because he had a divine appointment with that widow and with that son of the widow. And Jesus knows where we are. He meets us where we are. He arranges things so that we will see him very clearly. He's always on time. Perfect timing. He gets accused in the story in John chapter 11 by Mary and Martha, that he was late because Lazarus had died. But Jesus is always on time because he has the power. God is outside of time. Time was created when God created everything. He exists outside of time. He can manipulate things and orchestrate things perfectly in order and in sync with what his will is. And so Jesus is always on time. And he meets this woman right where she is. Even though we don't feel like it all the time, God's ways are perfect. Even though it doesn't always seem to be going the way we think it should, his will is perfect. His actions are perfect. His plan is perfect. He knows what we need right when we need it, and he shows up and meets us in those moments. So we don't know exactly why he was in Nain or why he was traveling through or where he was going, but he was there to really meet with this woman. He's got a large crowd following him from Capernaum, and when he gets to the city, there's a large crowd surrounding this funeral. So Jesus comes across this funeral procession, and it's outside of the city. Okay, they're traveling outside of the city, which was common for burials. There would be a burial site because in their culture, the dead were unclean, right? So they didn't want that kind of thing inside the city, so they would move it outside the city. But he comes across this funeral procession leading out of the city, and he has compassion and he acts. So the second point I've got is the gate of the city. So when he comes into the town, he comes near the gate of the city, and he sees this happening. So what was the purpose of the city gates? Because if you read the Old Testament, there's a lot of commentary about gates of the city, like things happening at the city gates. And in a lot of towns, they were walled around. And so you would have, if you read about Jerusalem, it talks about different gates. And in several towns, they would have gates that would close, and they were for defense against any kind of attackers. So the gates were important for defense. They were important also for meetings, because that is where a lot of important decisions would be made. The judges would set up sometimes at the city gates. Important men would set up there, and that's where they would meet, and that's where they would discuss. And it was just a meeting place as well. Also, you would have merchants that would come through, and they would be right there at the city gates as well. The way the city gates were up high, it would provide some shade, and they could set up their booths, or people could sit there and talk right there. It was the entrance and the exit, so it was a very popular thoroughfare. Very, very popular place to be. So it was a meeting place. The merchants, the shade between the buildings provided a nice area. And a place for public speaking, a place for justice. I mentioned that. And so something interesting, though, is that Nain, when they did some archaeological, insights into it, it was not a fortified city. It was not one that had walls and gates. So what is meant here then by the gate of the city? And for some places that were not walled, they would have a more narrow place between the buildings that would serve as the same kind of, funneling in, narrowing in between homes on the main street to kind of provide the same idea. So the city gate, or the gate of the city, that was just the meeting place. That was kind of a very big thoroughfare. And that's where Jesus is coming in and they're coming out. You can't miss this, The funeral procession was leaving the city, and Jesus was approaching the city and coming near the city gates. So Jesus, as he is passing through, he sees this funeral procession, and he feels the depths of emotions that they're feeling. He's watching the scene. Jesus knows all things, right? But this is happening in real time, and he's feeling it as he's watching, and he's having compassion for those that are going through this. He sees a huge crowd coming out, and they're mourning, and this widow is mourning, and he just identifies in that moment with them in their humanity and their struggling in their grief. And he has compassion. And so I think the point for us then is that maybe we need to make sure that we also are noticing the people around us in their humanity. What is it that they're going through around us? And how can we be strategically placed the way Jesus was in this moment to help people? Are they going through happy times? Are they going through sad times? Are they struggling with whatever it is, how can we be better about being more aware of those around us and celebrating the joys with them and bearing their burdens as well and helping them when they're grieving or suffering or anything like that. So even if we're busy, even if we're just passing through, even if we're just there to get this one thing, or we're going through our life making sure we get this done today, how can we be more aware that people are around us and interacting with us, and maybe us at the grocery store getting our groceries isn't the main thing. Maybe it's the people that we encounter, and how can we be more aware of them? Maybe we should be more aware of those in need, even if we're busy and passing through. So I think that is maybe how to be a little more like Jesus in this moment, is just to be aware of those around us and watchful of the people and see the needs of the people and how we can help them, how we can bear their burdens, how we can point them to Jesus and the gospel and what that would mean for them in those moments. Maybe it's just meeting the need in that moment. So the application point then is just the awareness of people around us. And that's kind of what Jesus was doing. The third point is the only son of a widow. What is the significance then that it was the only son of a widow? Because it happens to mention that. And we know that that's not insignificant that it mentions that. So what's the significance then of it being the only son of a widow? So the significance then is that a woman in their culture without a male relative was very vulnerable. A widow could not inherit her husband's belongings, her husband's property, or his wealth or anything like that. So she was no longer provided for financially or anything like that. And so it would pass to the sons as the heirs. Well, this is the only son that she's got. So her husband's deceased and now her son is deceased. So this woman has no male relative to care for her. So she's very vulnerable financially and in society and all of that. So this woman is in a very unique predicament. Maybe it's not the same for us today. We don't really read it that way. But this was what was going on for her. She was going through grief. But at the same time, at the loss of her son, she was also now faced with a very uncertain future for her. She was being faced with, what does the rest of my life look like? How am I going to make it through now? Because the means that I had are all gone. The abilities I had, are in jeopardy. So not only has she lost and suffered heartache, she's now facing a very uncertain future. So Jesus comes along and he remedies that for her. Not only does he give her son back, but he secures her future and her present as well. So God cares for us. God takes care of us. He cares for the weak. He cares for the vulnerable people. We talked about how Jesus came and the prophecy said a bruised reed he would not discard, and a smoking flax he wouldn't extinguish. And that was a reference to the vulnerable people, the worthless people of society that would be cast aside because they're not valuable. Jesus would not let those people go. Jesus was not going to do away with that type of people. So here is this woman that is vulnerable, is weak, is not going to be provided for in the natural means. And God cares for us. He cares for us. He cares for the heartbroken. He cares for those that are suffering. And not only does God care for us in those moments, but he acts on it. Jesus takes the time and meets this woman here and just changes the course of her entire life, and not only did that, but also the man that died is now back. But I feel like the story's about this woman. It's about this woman and her future and what God did for a lowly, insignificant person in that moment. So God cares when we are suffering. God sees when we are suffering. And God has plans to remedy that. God can remedy that. God sees us and he cares and he acts to change our situation. When we are walking in the path of obedience, things will happen that will cause us to suffer. And God sees us in our suffering. He cares, and He will help us to make it through. He will help to alleviate the pain, alleviate the suffering, refresh our soul and spirit, and help to carry us through whatever it is. So God cares for us in those moments. The fourth point I've got is Jesus' words and actions. Okay, so what, no, I don't want to say that. Jesus saw this woman in her grief. Okay, and this is what He does. It says, when He saw her. And I think in life, a lot of times we fight to be seen and to be understood. That's one of the great things about humanity that's so baffling now. We are in a very social media age where we're seen everywhere. We can be seen online all the time. People can know so much about us, but never really see us, never really know us, never really understand us. And so we can tend to be very lonely in this life because we might be viewed a lot. We might be acquaintances, but we're not known. We're not truly seen and understood. And God sees us. God understands. God knows us. He truly sees us. In the moments when we feel like we're not seen, God still sees us. When the moments when we feel like we are struggling, when we feel invisible, when we feel like we are just treading water, God sees us. God cares for us in those moments. And so it says Jesus saw her. When He saw her, He had this compassion. And out of His compassion, He begins to act. And what He does is He spoke to her. He spoke words of comfort to her. While she's weeping, He tells her not to weep. And I was thinking, what would you do if someone in the middle of your suffering or your sorrow tells you not to cry about it? Don't weep, don't cry. It can be taken so many ways. You don't understand me. You don't know why I'm crying. You don't know what I'm feeling. You don't get it. Don't tell me not to cry and what to feel. We can get defensive. But here's Jesus saying, out of His compassion, don't weep. And it must have been the voice that He used, must have just let her know that He saw her. Don't weep. And so she immediately, her attention is now on Him. And then from there, He begins to approach the coffin. And He, in His tenderness and in His power, she's watching Him. The way He spoke and what He's doing. And He touches the coffin. And so what would you do then if this man has spoken to you with tenderness and compassion, and then you see He's approaching the dead? Well, in their culture, you can't touch the dead. That's going to make Jesus unclean, ceremonially unclean. It's just such an interesting thing to watch Him go outside of the norms. The dead, the unclean doesn't make Jesus unclean. He makes it clean, And so He touches the coffin, or the bier is what it would have been, B-I-E-R, bier. It's like a two poles with a flatbed kind of platform, and they toted it with their shoulders, like a little stretcher kind of. And it would have palm branches as a roof, and it was kind of ornate and decorated sometimes. It's just a little fancy stretcher. And that's where they would lay the dead, and they would tote them that way. But He touches it, this little open platform. He touches, and He speaks to the son. Okay? He speaks, and He says, arise. Young man, I say to you, arise. And the other thing to note is this is not a boy. This is a man. This is a grown man. So this is an older woman and an older son that has passed. So I say to you, arise. And he who was dead sat up and began to talk. Like instantly, life was restored to this dead man that has been dead long enough for them to prepare the body and get him ready to be buried and have a funeral. He's been dead a little while, right? And yet Jesus speaks, just touches the bier, and He speaks. And it makes all the difference. In that moment, this man is resurrected. And then He presents the son back to the mother. And all that means is, look, here, you've got him back. Your life is now restored to what you knew before. Your future is now secure for longer. I have given you back what was valuable to you. I have given you back your loved one. Don't weep because, I'm giving everything back. And it reminds me of John chapter 11. That's where he raises Lazarus. And in that, he says, chapter 11, verse 25, he says to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies. So Jesus has not only this resurrection power within him, but he is the resurrection and the life. And he reveals that power here first. He reveals this power to these people in this city that's not really ever mentioned again. To this widow that we don't even know her name, to these people that we don't even know their name. And yet it's recorded because it's important. And he did it here, not for pomp and circumstance, but purely because that was his mission. And he had compassion on those people. And he healed and he raised the dead. And that was part of his ministry. This is one of 3 people that he raises from the dead. This widow's son, Jairus' daughter, and then Lazarus. And then, finally Jesus raises himself. But 3 people that are recorded in the Bible. And when he speaks to John, this story is put here because the very next part of Luke is where John questions, Jesus, are you the Messiah? Or should we look for someone else? And Jesus quotes that verse in Isaiah about the lame walking and the dead are raised and all that, just to kind of summarize his ministry. And so Luke, I believe, puts this story here to segue right into that, to show this is what's happening. I am raising the dead. I am doing miracles, and this is an example of it. Every miracle of Jesus is not recorded in the Bible, but this one's put here, I believe, as a proof text to show you he did raise the dead. And I think this is showing his compassionate side as well as his resurrection power. And so Jesus sees us in our grief, in our joy, in our pain, in our heartache, whatever it is, Jesus still sees us. He sees us and he knows what emotions and suffering that we're experiencing. Jesus, it says he understood what it was like to be human. He knows what we are experiencing. We are never forgotten with Jesus. In your highest of highs and your lowest of lows, and the suffering and the seasons that you go through, where you don't know what the next day may bring, and you don't know what the next season might look like, and you're just in a winter, you're in the dark time of your soul, and you're just wanting more. Jesus doesn't forget you. He has resurrection power. He has power to bring change. He has power to bring life into those seasons. There is nothing in our life that is too late, too gone for Jesus to resurrect. There's nothing in our life, nothing too broken that he cannot make whole when it is surrendered to him. Now, there still will be consequences for sin and for damage that we've done in our life, but there's nothing that, when it's surrendered to him, cannot be made whole again, cannot be fulfilled, cannot have restoration and resurrection in our lives. So there's nothing in life or death that surprises him, and there's nothing that he doesn't have power over. Jesus' resurrection power then means that we will rise again. If we have faith in him, he can raise the dead, and he raised himself as the first fruit of many, right? And so when we have faith in him and we believe in his life, we believe in his death and his resurrection and what he's done, we will rise again. Though we die, we will rise again and have eternal life with Jesus. And that is the promise. That is what he is showing here, that he has this power and he can do it in our lives, both spiritually and then physically. In the end, he will raise us to new life. And the last point then is the outcome. So what is the outcome of this story here, other than Jesus raises the person from the dead, and the people are in awe, and they begin to glorify God. They begin to think Jesus is a prophet. A great prophet has risen among us. There were 2 really great prophets in the Old Testament. They're very well known during the time of the kings, Elijah and Elisha. Elijah and Elisha both raised people from the dead, and they both raised widows, sons from the dead. Elijah had a widow of Zarephath near Sidon, and he raised that son to life. And a Shunammite woman's son is who Elisha raised from the dead. So he raised women's sons. They both did to life. And here Jesus is doing that. And so in these Jewish minds, they understood a prophet does these things. Wow, he's raising men, of women like sons to life. So he must be a prophet. And then they said God has visited his people as well. So word is spreading around. They're confused maybe about who Jesus is, but they understand that God is with him, that God is doing something in the nation of Israel, that God is working. But they really don't connect Jesus as the Messiah. They think he's a prophet, or they think God is just working in and through him. So that is the outcome, is they believe, first of all, he becomes very famous, word spreads, and he saved this widow, and he spared her life here. He brought the son back to life, and he spared the outcome for this widow that was going to be financial strain and vulnerability in society and with finances. And Jesus corrected all that. Jesus alleviated all those fears and worries, and he got rid of the grief. It's just a beautiful thing that he's done. And like I said, this is recorded in Luke because he then next writes about John the Baptist. So this is prime positioned here for the conversation that he's going to have with John the Baptist, the exchange there about the dead being raised. So what has Jesus done here? Jesus has had compassion on these no-named people to raise them, raise from the dead, and to resurrect life for them. Resurrect the life that they had. Not just the son that was dead, but the widow that was not sure what tomorrow was going to bring. So Jesus has done that. And how does this passage characterize Jesus? When you look at this and you understand the storyline and why it's there, and how does it characterize Jesus, though? What takeaways from this do you have about the character of Jesus and the heart of Jesus? He's raising the dead, so he's powerful. It characterizes him with great resurrection power. He shows compassion. It shows the heart of God is not to watch his people suffer. It's not to watch grief. It's difficult for him to watch grief. He has compassion on people that are feeling that way. And I think it shows that he has life, power over life and death, which is something that nobody else, has. Once people die on this earth, we feel a grief because that's the finality that we're not able to have any remedy for, and yet Jesus has power over that. He changes those circumstances because God can do all things. With God, all things are possible, right? So he does these things, and it shows that he has this resurrection power. So what does Jesus raising this man from the dead mean for us then? And again, I've answered that as well. His resurrection power here proves his resurrection power, just like it did when he raised himself, that one day we will rise again. And finally, the miracles of God that we see are worthy of praise. So these people witnessed this miracle, and the outcome was that they glorified God. When we see God do a miracle, when we see God make a change in our circumstances, when we see him working in our life, it should bring out this attitude of praise, that we should glorify God. He is always worthy of praise just for who he is. He is always worthy, but especially when we see how he's providing for us, especially when we see how he's taking care of us, we should be inspired to praise. We should be inspired to glorify him verbally and with our life. We should regularly examine our lives to see just how good God has been to us. And that should inspire us to praise him. So maybe take a look at your life and what you're going through, and watch the hand of God move, and watch how kind God is to you. Watch how loving, watch how good, watch how powerful he is in your life. And make sure you make it a point to thank him and praise him for the work that he does in our lives. That's one thing that we can really take home from this lesson. I don't know what else you can take home, But that's one thing, is that when you see God move in your life, let it be a testament to him, and praise him and thank him for the work that he does and how good he is to us. So the summary is, Jesus does a miracle in Nain by raising this dead man, the son of a widow. And he shows his passion. Jesus shows his power. Jesus shows his provision. And Jesus shows his protection of the weak and vulnerable, because God cares. God has passion, power, provision, and protection for his people because he cares. And so if you're struggling with anything this week, if you're going through something, just remember that God sees you, that God cares for you, and that he has the power to make the change. Pray and ask that God would be, that God would show up in your circumstances and make the change. And then don't forget to praise. Always remember to praise him for what he has done in our lives. So that's the end of this lesson. Thank you so much for watching it. Join me in the next one when we're going to see the interaction of Jesus with John the Baptist. It's really with his disciples and his messengers, because John the Baptist is in prison. And so it's kind of this exchange that between the messengers that they have, and just some questions and how Jesus chooses to answer it. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in that one.